Nobody at Grace Tabernacle Baptist Church had ever seen anything like it. Not Sister Evelyn Marsh, who had attended more funerals than she could count in her 73 years and had a particular memory for the kind of details that reveal character. Not Deacon Horace Webb, who had known the deceased for over 2 decades and considered himself a fair judge of human nature. Not even Reverend Calvin Abrams, who had shepherded his congregation through grief enough times to believe he had seen every permutation of how people behave when money and loss arrive in the same room. None of them had ever seen a woman serve scraps at her own husband's funeral. But that is exactly what happened. At 3:47 in the afternoon, inside the Fellowship Hall of Grace Tabernacle Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a Saturday in late June, when the heat outside was the kind that made the asphalt sticky and the shade feel like a gift, in front of 200 people who had gathered to honor a man named Cornelius James Washington, his sister Renetta Faye walked to the head table carrying a paper plate, set it down in front of Cornelius's widow, and smiled. The plate held 3 things: a chicken wing, the flat kind, picked nearly clean, the kind you find at the bottom of an aluminum catering tray after everyone else has gone through, a tablespoon of rice, not a full spoon, a tablespoon, the kind of portion you'd give a child who wasn't hungry, and a dinner roll so stale it had curled at the edges and developed the particular hardness of bread that has been sitting in the wrong kind of air for too long. That was it. The widow's name was Loretta Washington. She was 67 years old. She had been married to Cornelius Washington for 32 years. She had built a life with that man from nothing, from a 1-bedroom apartment on Beatty's Ford Road and 2 used cars that needed work and a business idea scratched out on the back of a grocery receipt at their kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She had worked beside him every single day of those 32 years, through the lean seasons and the growing ones, and the years when success arrived so quietly they almost didn't notice it until they were standing inside something extraordinary. She looked at the plate. She looked at Renetta Faye, who was smiling the smile of a woman who has been waiting a long time to do something and is finally doing it. She looked out at the room. 200 people, all of them watching, conversations stilled, forks paused halfway to mouths. Then Loretta Washington picked up the stale roll. She broke it in half. She ate it slowly. She did not hurry. She did not perform composure. She simply was composed, the way a woman is composed when she has spent 30 years being tested by smaller things than this and has learned that her dignity belongs to her and not to whoever is currently trying to take it. Nobody in that room would fully exhale for the next 41 minutes. But to understand why what happened next mattered the way it did, you have to go back, not to the funeral, not to the fellowship hall, not even to the marriage. You have to go back to a rainy Thursday evening in 1992 to a community college campus in Greensboro, North Carolina. And a woman sitting in the front row of an evening accounting class with a notebook so full of margin notes, it was practically a book itself. Loretta Ann Caldwell had grown up in Raleigh, the second of 4 children raised by a woman named Dorothy Caldwell, who cleaned houses for a living, and a man named Raymond Caldwell, who drove long-haul trucks and was home on weekends when the Roots cooperated. The Caldwell household had one rule above all others, spoken by Dorothy every Sunday morning before church. You do not complain about hard. Hard is just the distance between where you are and where you're going. Loretta had taken that sentence and folded it into the center of herself at age 9 and never unfolded it. She was the child who did her homework by flashlight during power outages, and the teenager who worked checkout at a grocery store on weekends and put half her paycheck in an envelope under her mattress without being asked. The young woman who enrolled in Guilford Technical Community College at 22, 2 years later than she'd planned because the plan had been interrupted by a layoff and a sick mother and the particular reality of being the oldest daughter in a household that needed her, and who sat in the front row of every class she took because the front row meant you couldn't hide, and hiding had never been her style. She met Cornelius Washington on a Thursday evening in October of 1992. He was sitting in the wrong classroom. Loretta had arrived at room 114, Principles of Accounting 2, and found a man in the 3rd row who was clearly too settled in to be a student and too young to be a professor, and consulting a folded schedule with the expression of someone who had made peace with being lost. This is accounting too, she told him, because she was the kind of person who said useful things rather than polite ones. He looked up. He was tall even sitting, brown-skinned with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the specific expression of a man who was both embarrassed and amused by his own embarrassment. I know that now, he said. I'm supposed to be in business law next door. Then why are you still here? He folded his schedule. Because the professor in business law is already 20 minutes into a lecture on contract disputes, and I'd rather start fresh on Thursday. He paused. Also, this room smells better. She looked at him for a moment, the way she looked at all new information. Carefully, without committing to a reaction. Then she sat down in the first row and opened her notebook. He came back to room 114 on Thursday. Not for accounting too. He wasn't enrolled. He just came back, sat in the third row, and when the professor looked at him, he said he was auditing. The professor shrugged. Community colleges in 1992 were not running tight attendance operations. After class, he fell into step beside Loretta in the parking lot. I'm Cornelius Washington, he said. I'm not actually auditing. I just wanted to see if you were as focused as you seemed last week. And more, he said. You're more focused. You were the only person in that room who didn't look up when the ceiling fan started making that noise. Ceiling fans don't affect depreciation schedules, she said. He laughed. A full, chest-deep laugh that surprised them both. Can I take you for coffee? She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. I have class at 7. It's 5:15. Then we'd better walk fast. They had coffee at a diner 3 blocks from campus. He told her about growing up in East Charlotte, the son of a mechanic father who had opinions about everything, and a mother who ran the household like a corporation. He was 26, working construction management for a small firm, taking night classes because he had figured out, 2 years into the job, that the people making real decisions had business degrees, and he intended to be one of those people. She told him about Raleigh, her mother's rule about hard, the envelope under the mattress. He was quiet for a moment after that. Then he said, Your mother sounds like the kind of woman who's never wasted a day in her life. She hasn't, Loretta said. Neither have I. He looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. I can tell, he said, and the way he said it, not as a compliment, but as a recognition, the way you recognize something that matches something in yourself, was the moment Loretta Caldwell decided this man was worth paying attention to. They got married in 1994, not at a church, not at first. They did the paperwork at the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds on a Wednesday morning because that's what fit the schedule. The church ceremony came 6 months later, small, 30 people, Dorothy Caldwell in the front row in a yellow dress that she had sewn herself crying from the opening hymn. Cornelius's mother, Ida Mae Washington, had sat on the other side of the aisle in blue, also crying, though for Ida Mae the tears came with more complexity because she had hoped her son would choose differently, which is a story as old as mothers and the women their sons love. Cornelius's sister, Renetta Faye, had been 29 at that wedding. She had stood in the third row on the groom's side in a burgundy dress that was slightly too formal for the occasion, with an expression that was not unhappy, exactly. More like a woman calculating something she hadn't finished calculating yet. Loretta had noticed that expression. She filed it away. The early years of the marriage were, by every measurable standard, hard. They were also, by every unmeasurable standard, rich. They shared a 1-bedroom apartment on Beatty's Ford Road. Cornelius was still in construction management. Loretta had her associate's degree in accounting and was working at a tax preparation firm in University City, learning the industry from the inside. They ate a lot of rice. They drove the same car on alternate days because the second car needed a transmission repair they couldn't afford for 11 months. They argued occasionally about money, which is what people argue about when they're building something together and the building takes longer than the optimism said it would. But they also laughed constantly. That was the detail Loretta would carry for the rest of her life. How much they laughed. How even in the apartment with the plumbing that knocked in the walls and the upstairs neighbor who apparently wore tap shoes to bed, they found things funny. Cornelius had a gift for observational humor, monitored the kind that required you to be paying close attention to the world, and Loretta was the only person he'd ever met who was paying close enough attention to catch the references. They were, in the specific way of two people who have matched at the level of how they think rather than just what they feel, genuinely suited. By 1997, Cornelius had his business degree. By 1999, Loretta had her CPA. By 2001, they were ready. Washington Financial Consulting opened in a two-room office on North Tryon Street in February of 2001, with a second-hand desk, two chairs for clients, a printer that required a specific sequence of button pressing to operate, and Loretta Washington as employee number one. Her job title, which she wrote herself on a legal pad because they weren't yet at the business card stage, was everything, and that was accurate. She answered the phone and managed the books and researched compliance changes and made coffee, and on two notable occasions in the first year, cooked dinner in their apartment and brought it to client meetings because they couldn't afford restaurants, and Cornelius's cooking was a liability. She did all of this without salary for the first 18 months. There was no money to pay herself. They agreed on this together at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and she signed her name at the bottom of the agreement they wrote out by hand, because that's how you commit to something when you are too invested to need lawyers to make it real. Renetta Faye, during these years, had opinions. "Cornelius, you're going to run yourself into the ground with this business idea," she told him during a Christmas visit in 2002. They were in the kitchen and Loretta could hear every word from the living room. "You have a good job, a stable job. Why are you throwing that away?" Loretta didn't hear Cornelius's answer because he lowered his voice, but she heard Renetta Faye's response. "It's not throwing it away, Cornelius. It's exactly that. And I'll tell you something else. That woman has you thinking small. You could have done this in Houston, near family. Instead, you're here in Charlotte going broke for a dream that—" "Renetta Faye!" Cornelius's voice, when he chose to use it like a period, ended things. "Don't." She didn't. Not that night. But she came back to it. She came back to it every Christmas, every summer visit, every phone call. The variations were endless, but the theme never changed. Loretta was wrong for Cornelius. Loretta had taken him from his family. Loretta was the reason things weren't easier. Loretta, Loretta, Loretta. Always the variable in an equation whose answer Renetta Faye had decided before she'd done the math. What Renetta Faye did not know, because she had never asked and had never stayed long enough to observe, was what Loretta Washington actually was. She was the person who figured out, in 2004, that a systematic approach to small business tax strategy could save their clients an average of 18% annually, and turn that insight into the methodology that became Washington Financial's signature product and the foundation of their reputation. She was the person who, in 2007, when the financial crisis was cracking the ground under every advisory firm in the country, spent 6 months building out their risk assessment protocols from scratch so that not one of their clients lost their primary retirement account. She was the person who hired their first 10 employees and personally trained each one, who wrote the employee handbook, who set the office culture, who made Washington Financial the kind of place where good people stayed because they felt seen. She did none of this loudly. She had no interest in visibility for its own sake. She did the work because the work mattered and because Cornelius had a vision that she believed in, and building it alongside him was enough. By 2010, the firm had 32 employees and annual revenue of $9 million. By 2015, 60 employees and $23 million. By 2020, over 100 employees and $58 million. By the morning of June 14, 2026, and when Loretta walked out to the back porch of their Myers Park home with 2 cups of coffee and found her husband of 32 years sitting in his favorite chair, looking out at the garden with an expression of such absolute peace that it took her a full breath to understand he was gone. Washington Financial Consulting was worth $89 million, and their personal estate, built together with 32 years of precise and unrelenting effort, was valued at $144 million. She set the second coffee cup down on the small table beside his chair. She sat in her chair. She took his hand. "You made it beautiful," she said, to the garden, to the morning, to him. "We made it beautiful." She held his hand for 19 minutes before she called anyone. Then she called their attorney. Then she called Renetta Faye. Renetta Faye Burrell arrived 3 days later from Houston with 2 suitcases and her daughter Tamara, 27, who had the grace to look uncomfortable for most of the visit. Renetta Faye's son Marcus, 31, came separately on the day before the funeral, driving in from Atlanta in a car that Loretta noted had Washington Financial's old firm logo on the parking pass in the windshield. A pass that expired in 2019, which told her something about when Marcus had last been to Charlotte. The first thing Renetta Faye said when she walked through the front door of the Myers Park house was not hello. It was not I'm sorry. It was, I'll take the primary suite. It's only right. I'm his blood. Loretta had been awake for 72 hours in the way of a woman whose grief is too large for sleep. She was wearing a housecoat. Her eyes were swollen. She had, in the past 3 days, arranged a funeral, notified 200 people, written an obituary, coordinated with the church, fielded phone calls from every major client the firm had, and done all of it while carrying the weight of 32 years suddenly turned into memory. She looked at Renetta Faye. "Of course," Loretta said. "Let me move my things." She carried her pillow and her nightgown to the guest room herself, because she was the kind of woman who did not wait for help with things she could carry on her own. There is a specific kind of endurance that does not look like strength from the outside. It does not announce itself. It does not perform. It does not require an audience or produce a speech. It is the endurance of a woman who has decided, very early and very deliberately, that she will not be made into someone smaller by someone who needs her to be smaller, and who has held that decision through 32 years of holiday dinners and loaded comments and the specific exhaustion of being disliked by someone you are required to be in proximity to. Loretta Washington had that endurance in quantities that would have staggered most people. She had needed it from the beginning. The first time she truly understood what she was dealing with was Christmas of 1996, 2 years into the marriage, when Renetta Faye had come to Charlotte for the holiday and stood in Loretta's kitchen. The small apartment kitchen that Loretta kept immaculate, where she cooked everything from scratch because they couldn't afford restaurants, and because her mother had taught her that a table you've set yourself means more than one you've paid someone else to set. And said while watching Loretta season a pot of collard greens, "You cook like a woman who grew up poor." Loretta had kept stirring. "I did grow up poor," she'd said. "These greens are going to be outstanding." Renetta Faye had not responded to that. She'd left the kitchen. But the comment had established something, a register in which Renetta Faye would operate for the next 30 years. Everything Loretta did that was practical, capable, or rooted in working-class wisdom became evidence of inadequacy. Everything that was simple became evidence of smallness. Everything that was earned through actual labor became, in Renetta Faye's framing, evidence that Loretta had dragged Cornelius down. What made it sustainable, what allowed Loretta to absorb it without it changing her, was Cornelius. Not because he fought Renetta Faye on her behalf, though occasionally he did, quietly and with finality, but because of the way he looked at his wife when his sister wasn't in the room. The way he'd catch Loretta's eye after a dinner with Renetta Faye and just shake his head. Not in commiseration, not in pity, but in the specific way of a man who has assessed both women in the room and knows with absolute certainty which one he married correctly. The way he would say on Sunday mornings, when it was just the two of them on the porch with their coffee, "You know what you are, eh, Loretta?" And before she could answer, the answer to every question I didn't know I was asking. He was not a poetic man by nature. He was precise and practical and preferred spreadsheets to speeches. So when he said things like that, they meant more than they would have coming from someone for whom words were easy. She held those Sunday mornings like currency. They were what she spent when Renetta Faye made a withdrawal. The funeral planning war had lasted 4 days. Loretta had begun the arrangements the afternoon of the day Cornelius died. She knew what he wanted. They had discussed it, as people discuss these things when they have been married for 32 years and reach the age where the conversation is no longer hypothetical. He wanted the service at Grace Tabernacle, where they had been members for 22 years. He wanted the choir to sing "I Won't Complain" and "Total Praise." He wanted lilies, white ones, because Loretta liked lilies, and he had always chosen things she liked when the choice was available. He wanted the repast catered by Mama Addie's Kitchen, a soul food restaurant on South Boulevard that he had eaten at every Friday for 15 years, and whose owner, Adelaide Okafor, had been a client of Washington Financial since 2008. Loretta had confirmed all of it by the next morning. Renetta Faye had arrived and undone all of it by the following afternoon. "I've spoken with Reverend Abrams," she announced at dinner on the second night, the way a general announces a flank. "The service will be at 2 o'clock. I've chosen the music." She placed a paper on the table. "I've rewritten the obituary. How did the one you had focused too much on Charlotte? It barely mentioned his Houston years, his family, his roots. I've corrected that. I've also canceled the flower order and the catering." Loretta was eating. She set her fork down precisely. "The flowers were his request," she said. "Red roses are more appropriate for a man of his stature." "He didn't like red roses, Renetta Faye. He liked white lilies. He told me so. He never said that to me. He said it to his wife." A silence. Tamara, sitting across the table, looked at her plate. Marcus was on his phone. "The catering," Renetta Faye continued, "was overpriced and frankly unnecessary. Marcus found a service that does large events, much more reasonable. Cornelius had eaten at Mama Addie's every Friday for 15 years. Adelaide Okafor has been our client and our friend. He would have wanted—" "Cornelius is gone," Renetta Faye said. Her voice was flat. "I am his family, his blood. What he would have wanted is for his blood to honor him, and that is what I am doing." She stood up. She looked at Loretta across the table. "You were his wife, a marriage certificate. I was his sister for 61 years. We are not the same." Loretta looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Tamara, who had the grace at least to look ashamed, and at Marcus, who had not looked up from his phone. "Excuse me," Loretta said. She stood. She carried her plate to the kitchen. She rinsed it. She went to the guest room. Her guest room, in her house, in the home she had built. And she sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and she thought about Cornelius. She thought about the way he had laughed in that accounting class 34 years ago. She thought about the grocery receipt with the business plan on the back, which she still had in a shoebox in the closet of the room she was sitting in. She thought about the Sunday mornings. She thought about what he had said to her 6 months ago, sitting in his chair on the back porch on a cool December evening, his voice careful and deliberate in the way it got when he was telling her something important. "When the time comes, Loretta, and it will come, we're not young people. We're just lucky people. I don't want any confusion about what we built and who built it. I want the record to be clear. I've spoken to Nathan about the will. I've written something in there, in my own words, that I want read out loud at the repast. Not privately, out loud in front of everyone who comes." He had looked at her. "Will you let Nathan do that?" she had said. "Cornelius, are you sure?" He had said, "I have never been more sure of anything except you." So she had sat in the dark on the edge of the guest room bed, and she had called Nathan. Nathan Beaumont was a 64-year-old estate attorney with silver locks and a reputation in Charlotte legal circles as the most unflappable man in any room he entered. He had handled Cornelius Washington's legal affairs for 21 years. He answered on the second ring. "Loretta, how are you holding up?" "I'm holding, Nathan. I need to ask you something about the reading. I was going to call you about that this week. Given everything, I thought we might delay." "No, I want you to read it at the repast. Saturday, after the service, I'm in the fellowship hall, in front of everyone." A pause. "That's unusual, Loretta. The family dynamic right now might make—" "Cornelius specified it, Nathan. He said in front of everyone." "You know he did." Another pause. Longer. "Yes," Nathan said quietly. "He was very specific." "Then I need you to honor that. Saturday. Bring the full document." "I'll be there," Nathan said. "Loretta." "Yes?" He thought about this very carefully, what he wrote at the end. He wanted you to know that when he wrote it, he was thinking about 32 years. Every single year. She had pressed the phone against her ear for a moment. "I know," she said. "Good night, Nathan." She had lain back on the guest room bed and stared at the ceiling and said quietly, away into the dark of a room that still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she kept in the linen closet. "I know what you're doing, my love. I trust you." The morning of the funeral, Renetta Faye surpassed herself. Loretta came downstairs at 7:30 in a black dress that was simple and correct and dignified. The kind of dress that required no explanation, the kind worn by a woman who understood that funerals are not occasions for statement, but for presence. Small pearl earrings, a black headscarf tied with care. No jewelry beyond the wedding ring she had not removed and would not remove. She was standing at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when Renetta Faye looked her up and down and said, "You're wearing that. You look like the church custodian." Loretta drank her coffee. Tamara, to her credit, said, "Mama, stop. I'm just saying. Cornelius was a man of standing. His wife should look the part." Loretta set the mug down. She looked out the kitchen window at the garden. At the roses Cornelius had planted 5 years ago because she liked roses. And she breathed. Then she walked out the front door and sat on the porch in his chair. She sat there for an hour and 10 minutes. The morning was warm and clear, the kind of June morning that doesn't yet know what the afternoon will become. The neighbor's roses were blooming. A cardinal landed briefly on the porch railing and regarded her with the unbothered confidence of a small animal that has never needed anyone's permission for anything. Loretta watched it until it left. Marcus came out and sat beside her. Not Tamara. Marcus, who had been on his phone through every family dinner, who had never once in Loretta's memory asked her anything about herself, who was the son of the woman who had just called her a church custodian. He sat down and looked at his hands for a moment. "Aunt Loretta," he said. She waited. "I'm sorry." He paused. "Not just about Uncle Cornelius. About—" He stopped, started again. "My mother is how she is. That's not an excuse. I know it isn't. But I've watched her treat you wrong for a long time, and I never said anything. And I should have." He looked up. "Today especially. Today was wrong." Loretta looked at him. She saw for the first time something in his face she hadn't seen before, or hadn't been looking for. Cornelius's jaw, the same set of it. She felt something move in her chest. "Your mother lost her brother," Loretta said. "That's real. Whatever else is true, well, that's real and I won't forget it. You're more generous than she deserves." "Maybe, but generosity isn't about what people deserve, Marcus. If it were, it wouldn't be generosity. It would just be a transaction." He was quiet for a long time. "Uncle Cornelius always said you were the smartest person he'd ever met. He was biased. He wasn't wrong." She almost smiled. They sat together until the car came. Two people on a porch who had never really talked before and had, in 20 minutes, finally started. The fellowship hall at Grace Tabernacle seated 230. It was full. Cornelius Washington had been, in the 32 years of his life in Charlotte, the kind of man whose absence from a room was immediately noticeable. Not because he was loud, he was famously quiet, but because he paid attention in a way that made people feel seen. And people you've made feel seen tend to show up when you need them to, even if you are no longer there to notice. His clients came, his employees came, his church came, his neighbors came, old college classmates came, and former professors and the mechanic he had used for 20 years, and Adelaide Okafor from Mama Addie's kitchen, who was seated near the back in a purple dress and had been crying since before she sat down. The catering was, as Renetta Faye had arranged it, from a chain service. Aluminum trays, dry chicken that had been sitting in warming drawers past its prime, green beans with the color cooked out of them, dinner rolls from a bag, paper plates and plastic cutlery. Why 200 people who had known Cornelius Washington ate off paper plates, and every single one of them understood, without anyone saying so, that this was not the table he would have set. Adelaide Okafor, who had prepared her famous smothered oxtails and her cornbread and her banana pudding from scratch that morning, and had them in her car because Loretta had called her before the week went wrong, had been redirected at the church kitchen door. "We have catering," Renetta Faye had told her. Adelaide had looked at the aluminum trays and said, with the restraint of a woman who runs her own business and cannot afford to make a scene at a funeral, "I'll leave these in the kitchen in case they're needed." They were needed. By the end of the repast, people had found their way to Adelaide's trays the way people always find their way to real food. But none of that was what anyone would remember about that afternoon. Loretta sat at the head table. Renetta Faye sat to her right. Tamara and Marcus sat across. The table was set for family, though the definitions of that word were under considerable revision by that point in the week. What happened next, Loretta would later say, she almost stopped. There was a moment, a single moment, when Renetta Faye picked up that paper plate from the serving area, and Loretta could see what was on it, could see what was being assembled and why. And she thought, I could stand up. I could speak. I could prevent this. She didn't. Not because she was helpless, and not because she had given up. She didn't because Cornelius had asked her to trust him. Washington she did, and she had been trusting him for 32 years, and he had never once been wrong. So she let Renetta Faye set the plate in front of her. She looked at it, the chicken bone, the tablespoon of rice, the stale curling roll. She looked at Renetta Faye, who was wearing her smile. She picked up the roll. She broke it in half. She ate it in the silence of 200 people who had stopped breathing. Renetta Faye leaned close. This is what you get, she said, her voice low enough that only Loretta could hear. Scraps. That's what you always were to this family. You took him from us, and now he's gone, and you will get what you deserve. I've already spoken to attorneys in Houston. Whatever he left, it belongs to his blood. You will be lucky to keep this tablecloth. Loretta finished the rice. She set down the plastic fork. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked straight ahead at the 200 people in the room, at the faces of people who had known her husband, who had loved him, who were watching this with the specific helpless horror of people witnessing something they cannot stop and are not sure how to name. We'll see, Loretta said. There's nothing to see, Renetta Faye said. I've already... Renetta Faye! Loretta turned and looked at her directly for the first time that afternoon. We will see. She had a tone. It was not the tone of a woman who is being brave. It was the tone of a woman who knows something you don't and has decided to let the clock run down. Renetta Faye heard it and felt, for the first time since she had walked into this week with her agenda and her suitcases, a faint and unfamiliar uncertainty. Nathan Beaumont stood up at 4:23 in the afternoon. He had been seated in the back row since before the repast began, the way a man sits when he is present in an official capacity and is not there for the food. He was 64 years old, silver-haired, dark-skinned, wearing a black suit that was not expensive in a way that announced itself, but expensive in the way of something made to last. He carried a leather briefcase. He stood slowly, with the deliberate energy of a man who has stood up in rooms like this many times and has learned that pace is its own kind of authority. He walked to the front of the room. Every conversation stopped, not gradually suddenly as if someone had pressed a button. Forks were set down. Chairs were turned. Adelaide Okafor in the back sat up straighter. Franklin Odom, Cornelius's business partner, who had been talking to a client near the side door, went still mid-sentence. Nathan stood at the front of the room and opened his briefcase. He removed a document bound in a blue legal cover. He set the briefcase on a chair. He looked out at 200 people over his reading glasses. My name is Nathan Beaumont, he said. His voice was unhurried. The quieter you speak, the harder they listen. I am the senior estate attorney at Beaumont and Associates in Charlotte. I was the personal attorney and estate counsel to Cornelius James Washington for 21 years. He paused. I am here today at Mr. Washington's express written instruction. His final testament contains a specific clause requiring that the will be read publicly at the funeral repast, in the presence of family, friends, employees, and community. I am honoring that instruction. He opened the document. Renetta Faye's voice came from the head table, sharp. Who arranged this? Nobody told me about... Mrs. Burrell. Nathan's voice did not change register, did not sharpen. Just said the name the way you say a name when you need someone to stop talking. She stopped. The terms of this reading were established by Mr. Washington himself, in writing 21 years before his death, with the specific public reading clause added and notarized 6 months ago. There is no version of these proceedings that requires your prior notification. He looked back at the document. I'll begin. The room was the kind of quiet where you can hear the building. I, Cornelius James Washington, being of sound mind and full legal capacity, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, executed on December the 9th, 2025, and superseding all previous instruments. He turned the page. Article 1. To my wife, Loretta Ann Washington. He paused briefly. I leave the following. He read the address of the Myers Park house. He read the address of a lake property in Catawba County that Renetta Faye had not known existed. He read the address of an income property in Atlanta, generating annual rental income that made three people near the back table do quiet math and reach surprising conclusions. He read the details of Loretta's full ownership of Washington Financial Consulting 91% equity stake, valued by independent appraisal at $87 million. He read the investment portfolio figures Vanguard, Fidelity, private holdings collectively valued at $31 million. He read the endowment details of a charitable foundation, the Washington Family Community Foundation, with Loretta Washington as sole trustee, carrying $12 million designated for scholarships and small business development in Charlotte. He read the total. The estate assets designated for Mrs. Loretta Ann Washington are valued at approximately $144 million. The Fellowship Hall of Grace Tabernacle Baptist Church produced a sound that no one present would be able to describe accurately afterward. It was not applause and it was not chaos. It was something in between. The sound of 200 people simultaneously understanding something that reordered what they thought they were looking at. Renetta Faye stood up. Her chair scraped. That is not possible. That cannot be right. He did not have. There must be an earlier version, a different document she must have. She manipulated him at the end, when he was sick, when he couldn't think. Mr. Washington was examined by his physician, Dr. Patricia Gaston of Carolinas Medical Center, on December the 6th, 2025, 3 days before executing this will. Nathan's voice was unchanged. Dr. Gaston's certification of full mental competency is attached as Exhibit A. There is no earlier version. There is no competing instrument. This is the sole valid testament. She poisoned him against his family. Renetta Faye's voice was climbing. She kept him in Charlotte, away from his blood, and she worked on him and Mrs. Burrell. Nathan's voice for the first time shifted, not loud, not sharp, waited. Your brother wrote something in this document in his own hand. He asked me to read it last. I intend to do that now. Renetta Faye was standing with her hand on the table. Her face had gone through several colors and had arrived somewhere gray. Nathan found the last page. He adjusted his glasses. Article 3, he said, personal statement, written in the hand of Cornelius James Washington, to be read verbatim. The room was absolutely still. To the people gathered here today, my family, my friends, my clients, my community, I want to tell you the truth about my life, because I am not here to tell it myself, and so I have written it down and asked Nathan to speak it for me. Nathan's voice was steady, even. The voice of a man who has read difficult things aloud in front of people many times and understands that the reading is a service, not a performance. Somehow, I built a company worth $89 million. I built a marriage worth more than that. Both of those things are true, and they are not separate things. They are the same thing. The company exists because of Loretta, not partly because of Loretta. Loretta was looking at the table. Her hands were folded. Tears were running down her face without sound. She was my first employee, my first investor, my first partner. She put $6,000 of her own savings, every dollar she had, into Washington Financial in 2001, when no bank would give us a second look. She answered phones and balanced ledgers and cleaned that office and drove to client meetings and made meals in our apartment when we couldn't afford restaurants, and never in 32 years. And once asked for recognition she had not already earned. Franklin Odom had his face in his hands. Reverend Abrams was holding his Bible. I want to say something about my sister Renetta Faye. The room changed again. Renetta Faye's hand tightened on the table. I love my sister. I have always loved her. I paid her mortgage in 2011, and I paid for her children's education, and I sent money every Christmas, and I flew her to Charlotte, and I answered every phone call. I did all of this because she is my blood, and family takes care of family. But I am not a man who dies with things unsaid, and so I am saying this. I saw what you did to Loretta for 32 years. I saw every comment and every dismissal and every holiday dinner where you made the woman I love feel like a visitor in her own home. I asked you to stop more than once. So you told me I was being dramatic. Renetta Faye sat down. She sat down the way a person sits when their legs decide before their mind does. Loretta never asked me to choose. She never once spoke badly about you to me. Not in 32 years. She absorbed what you gave her, and she kept building, and she kept loving me, and she kept being exactly who she was. And who she was is the finest person I have ever known. Adelaide Okafor in the back of the room was crying openly. She was not alone. So this will is my answer to a question you have been asking for 32 years, Renetta Faye. The question of who Loretta was to me. To me, she was everything. She was the work and the reward. She was the reason, and now everyone knows it, which is the way I wanted it. Nathan closed the document. So where Article 2, the bequest to extended family, had come before the personal statement, Renetta Faye had received from her brother's estate a framed photograph of their mother, which hung in Cornelius's office. The Washington family Bible, leather-bound, their grandmother's name on the inside cover. That was the entirety of it. Derek and Priscilla received trust funds. The employees of Washington Financial received a profit-sharing distribution. The church received an endowment for the children's ministry. Renetta Faye had received a photograph and a Bible. She understood, sitting in that chair with her legs shaking and her face destroyed, that this was not cruelty. This was precision. This was a man who had loved his sister enough to tell her the truth in the most permanent way available to him. The room held its silence for 9 seconds after Nathan closed the document. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, quietly, Adelaide Okafor in the back, who had known Loretta Washington for 18 years and had fed her oxtails on 30 Fridays, and understood completely the woman who was sitting at the head table with tears on her face and her hands still folded in her lap. Then Franklin Odom. Then 2 employees near the side table. Then Reverend Abrams. Then the whole room rising, 200 people on their feet in a church fellowship hall in Charlotte on a June Saturday. Not for the money, for the truth. Loretta sat for a moment and let the sound wash over her. She closed her eyes, and in the warm noise of that room she felt, distinctly and unmistakably, the specific warmth of a man she had loved for 32 years. Not as a ghost, not as imagination, but as the accumulated presence of every decision he had ever made in her favor. Every Sunday morning, you are the answer to questions I didn't know I was asking, arriving all at once in a fellowship hall with bad catering and good people, and 9 pages of the truth. I know, she thought. I know you did. She opened her eyes. She stood. She smoothed her black dress. She wiped her face with both hands in the straightforward way of a woman who cries when crying is warranted and does not apologize for either. She walked to Renetta Faye. Renetta Faye looked up. Her face was unrecognizable from the face of the woman who had carried that paper plate to the head table 47 minutes ago. In all the architecture of the cruelty was gone, and what was left was just a woman who had lost her brother and had spent 32 years being angry in the wrong direction and had just been shown the full cost of it in front of everyone she knew. Renetta Faye, Loretta said. Renetta Faye shook her head. You don't have to. You are still his sister, Loretta said. That didn't change today. It won't change. After what Renetta Faye's voice broke. The plate, Loretta, the plate. I don't know why she stopped. I do know why. I've always known why. I just never admitted it. Loretta sat down in the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her. She put her hand over Renetta Faye's on the table. Because you loved him, Loretta said, and you were afraid that love divided meant less. That's not how love works. But that's how fear tells you it works. And you listened to the fear for 32 years. She paused. That's a long time to be afraid, Renetta Faye. Renetta Faye looked at her, really looked, perhaps for the first time in 32 years, the way you look at someone when you have finally stopped constructing a version of them that fits your story and are looking at the actual person. What she saw was a woman of 67 with tired eyes and steady hands, and the kind of face that has been shaped by both grief and joy in roughly equal measure, which is the face of a person who has actually lived. Why are you kind to me? Renetta Faye whispered. Because he loved you, Loretta said. And because carrying 32 years of that is heavy enough, I'm not going to add to it. Marcus appeared beside them. So he put his arms around both women without a word. Tamara came around the table. Adelaide Okafor arrived from the back of the room and simply stood near, her hand resting briefly on Loretta's shoulder, saying everything and nothing. Nathan Beaumont found Loretta near the kitchen door 2 hours later, when the repast had wound down to the last conversations and the last cups of coffee, and the last people who couldn't quite bring themselves to leave yet. He shook her hand. He was a remarkable man, Loretta. He was the best person I knew, she said, and I knew him well enough that that means something. Nathan almost smiled. He made me promise to tell you if you seemed like you needed to hear it, that he wrote that statement over 4 evenings. He told me he kept starting over because he was afraid the words weren't good enough. Loretta was quiet for a moment. Tell me what he settled on was close to good enough. Tell you? Nathan said. You were in the room. She laughed. A real one, brief and bright, the kind that surprises itself. I was. She drove home alone. She pulled into the Myers Park driveway and sat in the car and looked at the house. Her house, Cornelius's house, theirs, built over 32 years of shared dinners and late-night work and Sunday mornings on the porch, and the slow, enormous labor of 2 people deciding every day to build something together. She went inside. She walked to the porch. She sat in his chair. The June evening was softening, the heat giving way to the cooler air that comes after 6 o'clock in summer. And the garden was doing what Cornelius's garden always did in late June, performing quietly, the roses and the daylilies and the fig tree at the back fence, all going about their particular business without fanfare, which was, she had always thought, the right way to go about things. She had his coffee mug. She had brought it from the kitchen without deciding to, the way you carry things that belong to someone you love. She held it in both hands. They heard you, she said. To the garden, to the evening, to the particular quality of light that comes at the end of a hard day when the world is finally settling. Every word. You should have seen their faces. She sat until the stars came out, until the garden went dark and then light again under the motion sensor lamp at the back fence. It's until the neighborhood went quiet around her and Charlotte did what Charlotte does at the end of June evenings. Breathed. She thought about a rainy October evening in 1992. A man in the wrong classroom with water dripping off his forehead and 3 books under his arm, and a laugh that surprised them both. She thought about the grocery receipt. She thought about 32 years of Sunday mornings, and every year between the first one and the last one, and everything that had been built in between. She thought about what he had written, the way he had written it, the finest person I have ever known, in his handwriting, which was precise and slightly left-leaning and had never changed in 32 years. She closed her eyes. She held the mug. She let herself be for just that hour. In the specific and unrepeatable quiet of a woman who has been fully known by someone and fully loved, and who carries that with her now as the truest thing she owns. On the other side of Charlotte, Renetta Faye Burrell sat in a hotel room and looked at the framed photograph of their mother that Nathan had arranged to have delivered. Their mother's face, round and certain, looking out from a time before all of it. Before Houston and Charlotte and 32 years of a war that had never needed to be fought. She held the photograph. She didn't sleep for a long time. In the morning, she called Loretta from the airport. The call lasted 11 seconds. I'm heading home, Renetta Faye said. Travel safe, Loretta said. A pause. I'll call you next week. Okay, Renetta Faye. Another pause. I'm sorry, Loretta. I know you are. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she looked out the window at the runway, at the planes moving in their patient circles, and she thought about what it might mean to start something. Not to fix 32 years overnight. Not to pretend the photograph and the phone call were the same as 32 years of chosen differently, but to begin. Just that. The beginning of beginning. Loretta Washington, on her porch in Myers Park, watched the garden in the morning light and drank her coffee and was, in the way of people who have earned it slowly and completely, at peace. Not because the grief was gone. It wasn't. It would be with her for the rest of her life in the particular way of grief for someone you have loved so long, they have become part of the structure of you. And their absence is felt not as an event, but as a constant, quiet pressure. But because she knew who she had always known. And now, as Cornelius had wanted, everyone else knew too. 9 pages. That's all it had taken to say what 32 years had built. But the 32 years, the envelope under the mattress, and the front row of the accounting class, and the $6,000 in the borrowed desk, and the rice dinners, and the Sunday mornings, and the work, always the work, faithful and daily and enormous. The 32 years were what had made the 9 pages true. A plate of scraps at a funeral, a leather briefcase opened at 4:23 on a Saturday afternoon, and the truth spoken out loud in front of everyone, the way Cornelius Washington had always intended. The garden was blooming. Loretta drank her coffee. She kept showing up. That was all it had ever been. That was everything it had ever needed to be.